Black River is located in Michigan's northeastern Lower Peninsula in Alcona County. It lies on the shore of Lake Huron and is named after the river that flows through it. Due to the limited number of images available, some images have been added to facilitate a close facsimile to the original way that things were done. Images provided by Clements Library of University of Michigan, Alcona Historical Society, Wikipedia, Google Earth, and the Smithsonian. Just north of Harrisville, you take Lakeshore Drive north off US 23 for about 8 miles, and you'll arrive in Black River. There are no signs to alert you that you've arrived. You cross the bridge over the river, turn left at the church, which is the oldest still standing building, and within a quarter mile, you're out of the village. The Black River itself was named due to the color of the water that flows out of the river. The water is very dark due to high levels of tannins from decaying plant material. The darkness of this water is clearly shown flowing to the south along the shoreline in this aerial view from Google Earth. William F. Cullings, known as Uncle Billy, was a former lake boat captain. He bought a sailboat in 1835 and headed north, operating out of the Asable River. He earned a living by fishing seasonally along the Huron shore. He came to know every inch of the shoreline between Mackinac and the Saginaw Bay. In 1849, he bought a government 40 and established a fishery at the mouth of the Black River, an ideal harbor. This nautical chart shows the reef to the north of the river mouth, which leads from shore to the Black River Island, and another reef to the south that also occasionally has an island visible. The southern island's not as pronounced as the one to the north. Due to fluctuating water levels, it's usually hidden beneath the waves. The natural reefs that extend from the shoreline out into the lake on the north and south side of the river mouth created a natural harbor as William Cullings had discovered. The protected area along the river was an ideal location from which to harvest and transport timber. The vast numbers of cedar and pine trees in the area provided all the resources for a company to cash in on. Logging had been done in the area previous, but it wasn't until 1876 when the massive Alger and Smith Company set up operations in Black River and began harvesting the abundant pine trees that grew from the shore inland 25 miles. A town was constructed to house all the workers and their families. The workers came from all over, bringing many different ethnic backgrounds into the area. The company built everything: homes, saloons, hotels, a church, and all the buildings needed to harvest, process, and ship the timber. Some early workers built their own homes. This would be the only economic boon that the Black River would ever see. The population soon swelled to over 2,000, and the logging operations ran 24 hours a day. Mr. Alger even had his workers sign a waiver circumventing Michigan's 10-hour labor law. Russell Alger in 1884 would eventually become the governor of Michigan, serving from 1885 to 1887, and eventually working his way into Washington, D.C. Initially, logs were floated and rafted down the Black River to Lake Huron. The river would become choked with timber, and the spring thaw would allow them to float down to the mouth. Rafting the logs was very dangerous work, and it required good balance to stand atop the unstable logs. An article in the Saginaw Courier-Herald, Musings from the Shore, in 1879 reads, "Black River begins to improve, or the company begins to improve it, since they've decided to move all their work from Harrisville to this point and make this the base of operations. They're putting up several houses for their workmen, an engine house, and building a breakwater which is intended to enclose a boom in which to do their rafting, thereby avoiding two of the greatest perils to which lumbermen are subject on this shore: fire and water or wind. The water is necessary, but the wind sometimes stirs it up too much and makes it very disagreeable, with sometimes considerable loss attached." So in 1879 a jetty was constructed so that a boom could stretch across the mouth and out into the lake, holding the logs for raft construction. Here the jetty can still be seen in the background of this 1920s photo of Elmer McCoy and his fishing boat. Railroads changed the logging operations for good. When the size of the river could not keep up with the enormous amount of logs that the fellers cut down, a small gauge railroad was built to transport the logs from further inland to the shoreline. No longer was the timber hauled out of the woods by oxen and horses. The steam engine could work 24 hours a day, never needing a break, and could work in all seasons, not needing iced-over roads or spring thaws to move the timber to the lake. In 1878, a small-gauge railroad was constructed and extended from Mud Lake in western Alcona County, 25 miles to Black River in the Lake Huron shore. The tracks followed the roads that had previously been made for horses to pull the logs to the shore. All of the trees were felled by fellers using crosscut saws. Wedges were used so that the tree did not bind on the saw. One can be seen resting on the log in the foreground near the axe. The trees once downed were then peeled or debarked with branches removed. The horses were managed by teamsters, who in the past used them to haul the logs on sleds out of the woods in the winter. With the trains now working, the horses were used to load logs up ramps onto the train carts. The carts were actually just the wheels, and the logs themselves became the cars. Some logs were 50 to 100 feet long and used for ship's masts. Horses were also used to haul cut lumber along tramways or tram roads, which were like small railroads with the horses as the engines. The cut lumber was stacked on the dock, waiting for ships to arrive and haul it to the cities to be sold. When the logs were hauled by train to the Lake Huron shore, most arrived the same day that they were cut. They were stacked and readied for rafting construction so that they could be towed south to the lumber mills. In this photo, a man stands on 30 million board feet of lumber. That's enough timber to stretch from Black River to Detroit and back 15 times. These piles were restocked as quickly as the logs were rafted away. The scale of the operation was massive. 4 trains were housed in an engine house. Rarely were all of them there at one time. They ran day and night from the forest to the shore. The largest locomotive was General Sheridan, weighing a whopping 64,000 pounds. The engine arrived in pieces on ships, and it was then assembled on site. Smaller switch engines were used to maneuver the cars for unloading and returning empty cars back into the woods. With the lumber at the shoreline, many logs were milled into boards and shingles and then loaded onto ships. Early transport was with 2- and 3-masted schooners. One can be seen in the background where the long dock from Black River extends out into the lake. Long logs and raw timber were transported by rafting them and towing them with the steam-powered ships. Information about the exact configuration of how they were arranged when towed could not be found, although documents state that some of these were half a mile long. The company spent $40,000 in chains alone. That is the equivalent of $1.2 million in today's dollars. The log rafts were then towed to Bay City, Ohio, and New York. Many ships arrived and departed Black River during this time, some delivering supplies, some seeking refuge, and others hauling boards and shingles to market. Large piles of boards can be seen piled upon the dock, waiting to be loaded. The schooners were used early on in the lumbering days, but eventually were found to be too slow due to the fact that they had to use the wind, and they could not always travel in a straight line. With steamers entering the fleet, the schooners were used as barges and they were towed behind the steamers, creating a train of ships. This would lead to many wrecks along the shoreline. Here is a 60-foot ship that had sailed up into the Black River to be loaded with cut lumber. The river was constantly being dredged to keep it deep enough for ships and materials to keep moving at a brisk pace. By 1902, as with all limited resources, all of the trees had been harvested and the company packed up and moved away to start over in another part of the state. The land was left barren. Most workers followed the company, but some stayed and others came to try farming the cleared land. The men of the logging industry were very hard laborers. The average pay was $2 a day, working from sunup to sundown. The pace and incredible number of trees cut down is very hard to comprehend. Figures vary, but at least 70 million board feet of long timber, 10 million of short timber, and 6 million cedar trees are said to have been shipped each year, making Black River the largest producer of timber in the world at that time. Enough was cut down, if it were laid end to end, it would reach from the earth to the moon and part way back. Homes that were left behind were eventually moved further inland to Harrisville, Alpena, and other areas nearby. Eventually, the company sold the remaining empty buildings and the remaining pilings out in the lake to a company in Bay City that removed it all and estimated that they got 1 million board feet of lumber and that the pilings, 30 years later, were in perfect condition. The once bustling Main Street became silent, even though some of the buildings, including the dance hall in the center of the photo, remained standing. Some lumbermen and sailors stayed in the area to begin fishing, harvesting whitefish, herring, trout, and other fish using long nets. Here they can be seen checking the nets for holes. It was lucrative for at least 3 companies, and eventually this too died out in the 50s. Recreational fishing does continue in this area today. The town of Black River achieved ghost town status by 1906 when there were only 50 residents remaining. The majestic Alger home was eventually torn down in 2009. The second church to be built in Black River is still standing. St. Gabriel Church is one of the few remaining buildings of that long-forgotten era. The trees returned and reclaimed the area as nature does. Today, the village is mostly home to retired people and summer vacationers. What will be the next chapter in the history of Black River? Only time will tell.